Well, hello again for another Grace Moment. We're interviewing the missionaries, the Parks, and so at this moment we'll let them introduce themselves.
Okay. I'm Larry, and my wife is Jane. I grew up in southern Minnesota in Blue Earth, and then I took off for Bob Jones, and that's when I met my wife, Jane. She had come from California and was planning. The first question she asked me, "Are you planning on being a missionary?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I thought about it, you know." And so she said, "Well, I'll date you again then." So then when we first got married at Blue Earth, we helped in the church. We became the pastor of the church in Grenada, Minnesota. We're there all the time while going to Central Seminary, then transferred down to Dallas Seminary, wrote a paper on Spain, missions in Spain, and that's how the Lord called us to Europe, the dark continent. I had been the second year the summer at Bob Jones. I'd gone to Scotland and realized how dark Europe was. But the world is in need all over the place. So wherever the Lord calls you, but the Lord seemed to lead us to Spain. And we're so thankful. We had 2 children when we came to Spain. Maybe I should let my wife explain a little bit about the children and where they are.
Both Larry and I have had a heart for missions our whole life. And I dedicated my heart to missions when I was about 15, 16 years old, and was convinced that that's exactly where God wanted me. At the time, as I was studying, I was thinking of being a single missionary and began studying into what would be a good ministry. And I was thinking of the carnivorous, or I don't know how you say it, cannibal tribes of Indonesia and Borneo. And I remember at the time thinking, because they said so many times that people had gone in there and the husband was killed and the families returned to their home countries. And I said, oh, that's just the place for a single missionary, because you can work with the children, the women, the men won't kill you because they don't think your brains are worth eating. And I thought, wow. But you know, God had another plan. And when he brought Larry and I together, he brought us to the point of recognizing the need of Europe, especially the land of Spain, which had never had the Reformation, and in fact had been very much closed to missions until 1968. And as our hearts began to reach out and cry out for these people, the Lord convinced us that he wanted us in Toledo. Sight unseen. Many missionaries tried to discourage us from going to Toledo, as it is the seat of the Roman Church. The Archbishop of Spain lives here, the one that represents Spain and the Vatican, etc. And we did have really difficult times in those first early years when we arrived here on the field. But you know, we realized after being here a very short time that God had especially prepared us to work in this culture, and our children as well. We found that our children were highly adapted to these people, and they are a culture very social minded, very open, very kind, and very helpful. And as the Lord brought us, Larry said, we had 2 children. We had our oldest son Nathan and Christopher, who was 10 months behind him. And while we were here in Toledo, the Lord gave us Sarah and Joshua. So we have 4 children who today are continuing to serve the Lord. Our Nathan is a full-time Christian camp director and conference speaker on the East Coast. Our son Chris is working, helping with church planting and assisting pastors in his area of Virginia. Our daughter Sarah and her husband, who is Catalan, work and serve in Grace Baptist Church in Barcelona. We thank the Lord for our Joshua also, who was called back here to the province with his wife, and they are presently leading one of our mission churches into church formation, and they have their papers now and are growing, and we thank the Lord for what he is doing in their lives and for what his mercies to us as a family.
Yes. And from the sounds of it, when you were dating, did you ask your husband if he was too tasty to go to cannibal countries?
Actually, my question was, what are you planning to do with your life? Mm-hmm. When I went to Bible college, I would not date. that seems strange for other people, but having come from a dysfunctional family where my mother had married 5 times and I had to take her to the hospital being beaten, I didn't know if I would know how to pick a man.
Hmm.
And so I had just made that decision. I would never marry. And so I wouldn't date until my second year in Bible college. And I was in the prayer room, and the Lord in my devotional time convicted me. He said, have you ever asked?
Hmm.
Have you ever asked me? And I started crying. I said, no, Lord, but I don't want to ask because you might say I need to get married. And I'm afraid. And he calmed my spirit. And I said, that's fine. But Lord, you'll have to pick the man. I'm not going fishing. And you will have to direct in your way, because I just want your protection and that I can serve you with my life wherever I am. Hmm. And the Lord did it. He brought Larry into my life. To this day, I don't understand. The few men that I dated, they were all very nice men. But one was going to be in business. One was going to go into the military. One was going to, they each had their own plans, which is right before the Lord. But I didn't see missions there. But Larry was the first one that said, well, he was planning on going into missions. And I remember saying in my heart, oh dear, I might have to date him a second time.
Well,
that was just God's way. God's way is perfect. And in fact, when Larry was doing his thesis, he told me one night, I believe God is calling us to Spain. I fled from where he was studying there in the dining room. I went to the bedroom and I threw myself on the floor crying, God, that isn't missions. That's Europe. But little did I know. We're really, even those of us who are preparing for the mission field at times are blind. Yeah. And it's only by God's grace we end up, if we take step by step with him in the right spots.
Well, and now nearly 50 years later, as you're serving God in Spain and doing great things, a little longer plan than taking him to Borneo and being steak. So,
yeah.
I would love to be able to, in time, maybe have a follow-up as you shared your story, with your mom being married, 5 different times. In a way, it sounds like you're the daughter of the Samaritan woman. And I would love to be able to see maybe somehow the seeds of the gospel changed your life specifically, and even your family, if we have a follow-up conversation. But going towards, looking towards how maybe COVID has affected your ministry, what restrictions are you guys in Spain, and what are ways you've still been able to minister?
So actually what happened, the church was asked to close its doors, and all the people had to, nobody could go to the church. And so I had to put a sign until further notice. And that was a couple months ago, that we put that sign on. And so we did try to do messages on WhatsApp, and then some Zooming and some others. And the church people actually then are using their computers and the internet and different things but we try to call, and people call. And some people will say, are you still around? Are you still there? How are you feeling? And one fellow that used to play with our boys, Juan Carlos Juanpe, and Juan Pablo, and he stopped and talked to Jane for 10 minutes. He said, I've always been looking to see if there's somebody around here yet. I remember your boys. I used to play with them, basketball and soccer and things. And so we found out, one missionary says it's actually, they moved into an apartment area, and it seemed like the neighbors were very, very cold. But at 8 o'clock at night, the people go out on their balconies and clap their hands to thank the people, the medical people.
Huh.
And so they went out on their balcony, and the neighbors saw them on their balcony, and the other neighbors, and they all started clapping, and it seemed like they felt like they were accepted into the
yes.
neighborhood.
Yes.
So I remember when we first moved in, we had a military captain who lived just about 100 yards from us, and he was with a special group outside of town. The United States Air Force was here when we first came. And a lot of people thought we were with the CIA, I think. And they'd never seen someone who believed different than what was taught, in the church here and things. And so, and they thought, well, what are they doing, But our two children really opened the door for us. And actually what happened is the first day in our home in Toledo, we didn't know what should we do? We don't have any church. We don't know any believers. And what should we do? And my wife says, well, why don't we sing some of the songs that we learned out in language school? So we started singing those songs, and the neighbor lady upstairs, a young gal of about 24, 2 years, she said, what's that beautiful music I heard? And we said, well, why don't you come on down? Next week, we're going to do it too.
Yeah.
So then they became...
Interesting, because so many times there are missionaries who'll come in and they say, well, how do you start a church? What do you do? I mean, no matter what part of the world you're in, you have to make a connection across the lines. And yet the Lord did it for us, because from that Sunday, that very first Sunday in Toledo, we had a family service, and we did it half in English and half in Spanish because it was just the two of us and our two boys. Mm-hmm. But the next Sunday we had two more. Huh. And we've always had Spanish with us, worshiping the Lord since.
Well,
that's just God's gift.
Connected to that with you, you're able to build relationships and also be able to really, in a way, do home ministry. What advice would you have for those of us who are in America who, for a long time we can meet Sunday mornings, but now we're having to do quite a bit of home ministry? What are ways that you would maybe direct us in America to build some of those connections and just be willing to listen to the Lord's leading?
I think one of the things I've noticed with my husband is that he knows no stranger. Huh. And no matter who he's around, or he could be in a bank line, and you and I would maybe get nervous because we've got, another thing to get to. We've got another thing on our schedule. But instead of getting nervous, he just starts talking to the people around him. He'll talk to the person in front of it. And by the time he leaves, everyone in that line has a track and they know who he is. And he puts his phone number on the back so that they can come and get connected with him in some other way. I have found too that sometimes we have situations like there was a young mother, one of our neighbors, married later in life, and she wasn't able to have a child. And when I was talking with her one day, I said, well, what would you like me to pray with you? What would you like me to pray for? And I remember her saying, oh, how I would love to have a child. And when 10 months later she had a child, she came to me. You see, it's like one of my other neighbors said to us one time when we were living in the condominium. She said, there was an accident. Her son was military, and there was an accident. And she came to me and she says, will you please come upstairs? I need you to pray. I can't tell my husband, but our son has just been in a bombing accident while they were cleaning a field, practice field of old munitions. And she says, I don't know if he's what state he's in, but if I tell my husband, he'll maybe have a heart attack. And I remember her saying, God listens to you. If you make it people aware that you're willing to pray for them, they'll come to you. They may not understand the plans of the gospel, but they will come to you. And if you open your home, you mentioned opening your home. We started the church in our home because we didn't have the money to go out. Some more modern missions approaches are to get a building and then start inviting people in. Well, we just had it in our home until we got to be 21 people, and then it was then against the law to have more than that number in a building. Not because we were worshiping, it's just because the buildings don't hold structurally that many people in one apartment. And so we had to look for a place. But using your home as a tool is letting them get a picture of what God can do in a home.
Maybe you could speak a little bit more to that aspect of home ministry. What are ways maybe that you're able to invite people to home? I love the idea of, praying. Can we pray for you? But maybe you could speak a little bit more into some of the specifics.
Well, right now we're kind of hindered in our ministries here because the Lord provided for us to move up to an urbanization. And when we have a little we have a parcela, or we have a little property around about us, but most of the people live in apartments. And so every end of the month, we have a birthday fellowship. And so the people from the church come up and we have the service in our front yard. And then we have a barbecue that follows, and we celebrate the birthdays. And so we've been able to use the place that the Lord has given us, since a lot of the people enjoy barbecues and being out in the countryside and things like that. And of course, the neighbors kind of wonders what's going on, with all these people over there singing all these songs, and then preaching. And so then we have youth rallies. So the actual summer for us is in our house is the last Sunday of each month. We're here. But then it's easy for us to take care of the people as well, because in our basement, we have a basement where the seminary professor can stay with his wife and the children and be separate from us. And so we use the house a lot still. And especially like when we have a baptism. We have the baptism at the church. We used to didn't have a baptistry before we built our church. And so we'd have to go to the river. Well, that's 2 hours away, and all the preparations and everything. And then a lot of people can't go 2 hours away. So then finally, when we built this new church, and it's on the corner of an apartment building, we actually put a baptistry in there. And the fellow said, what are you doing here? I says, well, we have a baptistry. We've never seen anything like this,
Yes, yes.
He says, well, why does it have to be 2 meters long and 1.5 meters wide? And he said, well, we fill it with water. Oh, he says, 1 meter square is a ton of water. We'll have to put some special beams underneath this. So they put these great big beams, so it wouldn't fall down in the garage. And so that we have the baptisms right here, and then we come up and make a paella. They call it a paella, which is lots of times there's all kinds of paellas. You can make them out of rabbit, you can make them out of chicken, and the Spanish love the mariscos, they call it. It's like the shrimp and the clams and the snails and all the shrimp and all that stuff like that. So we have 3 big paellas so that we can feed 150 people. And so it's usually we have some left over, because there's usually only about 120 maybe that come up, or So we have the morning service at the church. We come up and use our home then, and people like the fellowship. It seems like they kind of open up, and you can kind of figure out, and if they have a problem, if they know you. And I've had people that I've haven't seen for 20 years and said, oh, I remember you. I mean, your house. We were up there when the youth rally. It's every September, and so we've actually used our home. We're thankful the Lord provided it. And
I think what another thing is when people see you at a human level, whether you're a member of a church or something else, they see that your belief, your faith is based on God. It's not necessarily a building. Yes. It's a structure where you have a relationship with God. So when people come to these, our own church people, they will invite their relatives or friends or neighbors. We have neighbors that just come. We have a little boy that lives right not too far from here that every time our yard starts to fill up, he asks permission from his mommy if he can come and be with Priscilla and Lorenzo. And so he just comes, and all of our boys and our daughter, their friends would come to any kind of event that would be here. And then through that, many of their parents came to know the Lord as well. So it's getting to the point where the people see that it's not about an organization. It's about a reality with Jesus Christ. That's a real important factor. And it's an important factor for your kids too. Your own children need to realize that, the church is not perfect because it's people.
Yes.
And because people aren't perfect, the church can't be perfect, but that God is. and he has the final word.
Well, just hearing how some of your suggestions on being able to use the resources God has given you to be able to build relationships so they can see the gospel in real life has given me even some personal ideas to be able to maybe reach out, especially as some of the dynamics have changed here, at least in America. Go ahead.
I was going to say, just an example. A few years back, a woman started coming to church. She's now in the motor work. But Marisa came to church and she got saved and she was beginning to grow. She was in the work less than a year and she wanted to be baptized. Well, her husband wasn't saved. And so in the summer, when we started having the summer barbecues, he showed up to a barbecue and he walks up to me and he says, his name was Santiago. And he says, I'm Marisa's wife, but I want you to know I'm not into this religious stuff. I just came so that I could see what she's getting into. It's just, I don't want her to get into weird. Yes. And I said, that's all right, Santiago, just go around and talk to everybody. We don't care. You're welcome to come. And if you don't come, that's your choice. But just get to know some of the people. I think you'll find that we're just pretty normal folk. Well, he started coming regularly to those barbecues. The second one he came to, he tried to sell me a vacuum. Okay. I mean, he had his own agenda.
Yep. And
the third one, he came up to me and he says, you know, you're right. You guys are really normal, but you're better than normal because you get along. You enjoy each other.
Yes.
And with it, by November, he had accepted the Lord as his Savior. And the week before he died, the Saturday before he died in February. My husband was diagnosed with melanoma cancer in the fourth phase. And the doctor had at that time said that they didn't think he would live more than a month to 6 weeks. And Santiago was in the hospital because he had a respiratory problem in a pacemaker. He was in his mid-50s. We were older. But Santiago, as I was taking my husband home from the hospital from having an operation, he had 3 operations that month. And when I was taking him home from the 3rd operation, Larry said, take me by the hospital so I can see Santiago, because once I get home, I don't think I'll be strong enough to go back out and visit him. So we went to the hospital and he started crying and he said, it isn't fair. It isn't fair. If I died, it's no big deal. But if Pastor dies, he says, he's the reason I know the way. And he said, Spain still needs him. He says, I'm going to talk to God and I'm going to tell him that we need that Lorenzo stays in Spain.
Yes.
And I talked to him and I said, you know, Santiago, I said, this is a win-win for us. If the Lord heals us, it's a win. But if he doesn't and he takes Larry home, it's a win for Larry.
Yes.
Because that's just the way it is. We don't lose as Christians. And he says, but I really believe he needs to stay. Well, we left and Marisa told me we never saw him alive again. He died 2 days later. Marisa at the funeral came to me and she said, do you know what he said when you left? And I said, no. She said, well, I said, well, Santi, if you want to pray, we'll pray right now. He says, no, I'm going to die, Marisa. In fact, bring me my paper. I want to write my testimony out. And the first thing I'm going to do when I get to heaven, when the Lord comes to meet me, is I'm going to ask for Larry's life. And he's here today. That touched my heart. You know, we serve a real and a living God who does miracles. All the doctors, all 5 doctors that Larry had, said they'd never seen one of those cases to go completely clean. And he hasn't had any since. Melanoma's mean, especially the version that he has. He has the worst kind. But God in his mercy has given him these extra years. Those meetings make a difference to people, whether you're doing it as a church or you're doing it as an individual. I remember when we first came to town, some of the believers from the church in Zaragoza, where we had worked previously, we used to invite them to come to our home on their way to vacation. And we'd say, when you come, you stay with us overnight, and we'll invite all the people we're working with for a barbecue that night.
Yes.
And we want you to give your testimony to all of them so that they realize this is not an American religion. This is a real relationship with Jesus Christ. And they would do that.
So
You've got to make it.
Your church members were sharing their testimony.
No, the church members from Zaragoza were sharing
yes.
with the new people we were beginning to work with in the new Toledo plant.
Huh.
You know, we'd helped start a church in Zaragoza, and there were families that were saved that came through on vacation. And we would have barbecues, and invite people to come. And when these believers would come through on vacation so they could share their testimony. Huh. There's so many ways.
So one person said, that's the first time I've seen a Spanish that believes like that.
Oh. That's
I thought that was American.
To put a personal story to what God has done. So
yeah.
Another question, what are maybe some specific ways that we could pray or be an encouragement to you guys as you're serving in Spain?
Yeah, we appreciate your prayers. You know, it's the Lord's ministry, and He knows His sheep, and we just want to be faithful to make sure we can call, you know, and tell them the message, and the sheep will follow. And so many times we need wisdom as to how to go about things, and the devil likes to throw a lot of monkey wrenches into all of the Lord's plans, you know. But yes. The Lord knows the future, and the Lord knows how He can win the victory, and He knows who He needs to accept the Lord. So we're just thankful for the opportunity that the church has given us to help us to be able to live over here and tell people about the Lord. We had one of our first neighbors that was so interested in our message, and was the fellow who had been studied, I think, I'm not sure if it's how many years to become a priest, but he says they never use the Bible. And he you know, noticed there was something with it. And so one time I was talking with a professor of the seminary. There's 3 Catholic seminaries in town. And I talked to one of the professors. I says, well, how do you teach the book of Isaiah? Oh, he says, we teach the Bible just like we do all the books. We give them the Catholic interpretation, but we really don't read it. So we're just thankful. We know that the Word of God will not return void. And that's one of the reasons we kind of wanted to retire in Spain, because yes. We've been praying for some of these people for 30 years.
Yes. Want to be there when they're born.
Yeah. Yes. That reminds me, my grandmother prayed for my grandfather for about 30 years. And one day I said, what in the world is grandfather doing in church?
Yeah.
You know, I'd never seen him in church before. And that's the day he accepted the Lord.
Oh. Well, as we bring kind of the, at least the official recording to a close, wanted to share a real quick personal story. I was probably 7 or 8 when you guys had come and visited the church that my father was pastoring at. And one of the things that I remember both from both of you was you had joy. And now nearly 30 years down the road, seeing that exact same joy. And I just wanted to be able to give credit to the Lord for the joy that He has given you guys and you've allowed to flow through. So that personally has been a huge encouragement to me. So thank you both for your service, your ministry, both in the corporate sense as well as just in the individual sense that you've been to me. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you for allowing us to be able to visit with you.
Yes, it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.